Welcome, everyone, to episode 7 of the We're Not Lost podcast. I'm Joe. This is Leighton. And today we are blessed to have a very special guest with us. Stephen Fisher is here to talk about his new book, Sword Beach. Stephen is an archaeologist and a historian and author. And those of our listeners and viewers who have attended We Have Ways Fest or have perused through Woody's catalog at World War II TV have invariably seen Stephen's appearances. He is an outstanding author based on what we've been able to read from Sword Beach in the excerpts, and I think our viewers are really going to enjoy what he has to say, and he's going to shed some light on something, especially for our American listeners and viewers, about Sword Beach that they might not know. And we've got a lot of material to roll through, but Leighton, how are you doing today, buddy?
Oh yeah, I'm okay. Sunday evening here in the UK. I see Sunday, it's afternoon time. Yeah, but yeah, no, all good, all good. Yeah, I don't know what to say really. I'm a little bit sort of short of words today. But yeah, no, all good this end, Joe. You?
But without further ado, Stephen, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me and for that very flattering introduction. That's very kind of you.
Not at all. I forgot to put World Traveler on there as well.
I was in South Africa last week, and then
Oh
yeah,
wow.
last month I was in Antarctica, so I do move around a bit.
Yeah. Just to set the table quite a bit for a little bit. Again, the folks who've gone to We Have Ways Fest have obviously seen Stevens give his talks there, and I first learned of him from Woody's World War II TV and watching some of his very detailed and very intimate look at the various topics that he has spoken about. He is it's about to release, Stephen, or it's not on the shelves just yet, right?
It's not on the shelves just yet. I do have one of the very early print copies of my own now. So it exists in physical form, but it will be out in a month's time. On the 23rd of May is the official release date.
I cannot wait for it. In episode 6, I was promoting 2 books, yours and Niels Henkeman's soon to be released Defending Normandy.
I'm looking
I
forward to that.
I think that your book and Niels's book are going to be, as I said in our previous podcast, they're going to be game changers in the way people look at these fights. And Leighton and I have talked about it previously, in that we're a long ways past the 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s era of how we view history. Instead of it's the generals writing or someone ghost writing a general's biography and their big arrows on the map. Now, the the folks that follow along in World War II have an appetite for that very intimate, very gritty, very
Yeah.
almost narrow look at how we view these events. And you had posted a number of things on your Twitter account, which to me are just fantastic. You have a way of taking World War II era aerial imagery, overlaying it with Google imagery from now, and then merging it with war diary and personal accounts to bring this very, very tactical view of a battle that fits in the broader strategic battle. And I got to say again, the sample chapter you sent to us was just fantastic in terms of the level of detail and the personalities involved. And that's why I think your book is going to be a huge success. I mean, me personally, because people want to read about the men that actually did the hard fighting.
Yeah.
But for you, I mean, if memory serves, your background is in you looked mostly at the amphibious element of the battle space. Is that correct? Is that the
Yeah, so for a number of years, I've been primarily looking at just the beach, essentially, and yeah, that joining, if you like, of the maritime bit with the land bit, and yeah, as you say, the amphibious bit, and that's really because my background for a couple of years now, well, more than a decade, has been researching landing craft and some of these vessels that were transporting the troops over to Normandy, and that was partially from an archaeological viewpoint because I think it's back now, it's going 12, 13 years now that I first researched a landing craft, a wreck off the south coast of England that was taking troops over to Juno Beach. And so over the course of the last decade or so, I've ended up researching numerous landing craft. And every time I was doing this to try and establish the significance of this landing craft, you need to know what it was doing, where it was going, who it was carrying. And each time I was doing this, I would have to go to the National Archives in London to get this information. And it requires cross-checking half a dozen different documents to make sense of the embarkation orders, the load lists, the timetables. That none of it's all grouped into one document. You have to look at several to make sense of it. And as I kept doing this, and every time I would look at another landing craft, I was thinking, why hasn't this been written down? Why has nobody ever, compiled this information and turned it into something useful? And I had this idea of taking each beach in turn and compiling a narrative of who was on what landing craft and what happened to them as they hit the beach. So I'd literally take every wave that goes in on each beach and dissect that wave and what happens to the units that are on it. And I was quite focused on trying to get as much detail in as possible. And to simplify it, it would just be the beach. I wouldn't go any further than the road immediately inland from the beach. And I would try and pick apart exactly who was on what landing craft, what happened to them as they made their way up the sand. And that in that way, there would be a record of pretty much every landing craft in the assault waves on D-Day. And I thought, well, this is quite a big project. I'll have to do one beach at a time. And this was the sort of background to the idea. There's another aspect to it as well, in that I researched the embarkation on the south coast of England as well. And I look at all of the embarkation facilities that have been built by the War Office in 1942 and 1943. And I thought, well, I can extend this back to the UK, and I can identify exactly where these troops were getting onto their landing craft, at what time, and where they're bound for. And that still exists as a project in my head. In fact, the embarkation, I do have a project that I'm working on now, entirely self-funded, to research and record these embarkation facilities and record who was going on their landing craft and at what time. And that will be another book. It'll be a very different book one day. But when I was thinking about the other end, the Normandy end, one of the last projects I worked on before the pandemic was with John Henry Phillips, and he produced a book, The Search, all about his hunt for Landing Craft Headquarters 185. And he made a documentary about it as well, called No Roses on a Sailor's Grave. And he was looking for this veteran friend's landing craft. And I helped with the search for that. And I did the background research into what this landing craft had been doing. And this landing craft had been at Sword Beach. And so this is where I started to think of Sword Beach first, because there's so little about Sword Beach out there that I thought, well, this is a good one to pick, and I can work my way westwards through the various beaches.
There's obviously a massive gap in historiography.
Yeah,
when it comes to sword,
As I looked into it more as well, I thought, actually, there's not much on Sword at all. And everyone's heard of Sword. Nobody would deny that. And it's as famous as the other beaches. But there's only a handful of books actually dedicated to Sword Beach that have ever been published. And they're all slim paperbacks. They're very general overviews of what happens. And so, they talk about X battalion attacked and captured Y objective. And that's it. An entire battle is dealt with in a sentence or a paragraph. And the more I sort of thought about it and realized that, I thought, well, you can't just do the beach. You can't just leave the story when the troops get off the sand. You have to follow them further, because what's happening beyond the beach, the capture of the strong points, the capture of the inland batteries, is directly affecting what's happening on the beach as well. And then I just started to get this crazy idea that I should really write a book about Sword Beach as a whole, the whole area. And this was back in 2020 thereabouts, in fact, as this idea finally started to crystallize. And that was in July that year. I sat down and thought, right, let's just have a go at this. And I started hammering out just a sample. And I posted that on Twitter not long ago, actually, because that's where it all started.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and suddenly I had this idea that, actually, I don't have to write this very factual, detailed account. I can actually, make it genuinely interesting and exciting, and color it with the atmosphere of the time, with the emotions that people would have felt and the drama of the time. And I spent so long writing archaeological reports and heritage impact assessments and desk-based assessments and that sort of thing, I'd forgotten that I can actually write sometimes when I want to. And then I suddenly thought, yeah, this has the this could be a proper book rather than a textbook, or a
No, without a
reference
doubt.
work.
Like,
And
reading I think it was on page 8 or 9 on the sample you sent over to us, and just thinking about how the advance in from the beach and the cut across, essentially, to come in behind the strong points, but the level of detail and how you describe the men and how they viewed the action and then the reaction to German fire. And again, the level of intimate detail is the critical component to all this. But I also like that you introduced in your footnotes a level of critical thinking, whereas there's gaps in the accounts and there's gaps in the war diary, but you use your archaeologist lens, a forensic lens, to open up the optic and understand, why does the fire go like this, and why do the men react like that? Why do they take this avenue versus that avenue? Very methodical way of breaking down a battle. And I think it's also very digestible for even the layman. And I think you're
Me,
going to reach a broad audience, I think. I'm sorry, Leighton,
yeah,
what was that?
I'm one of those. Um, and that's why, Joe, we've spoken about this a million times, and I hear this on a James Holland podcast, and this is James Holland, where if somebody, if he's reading a book where it's like that general strategic tactical overview, he gets bored. And I think that's why he writes the way he writes, the way that, Stephen writes. I had this conversation, weirdly enough, with Henry Sledge yesterday, and we had exactly the same thing, is we love that grunt's eye view. And that's exactly what this is. And people feel that emotion of those who participated then, and can ideally you're looking at it through their eyes on word, obviously in words, but yeah, it's yeah. I'm one of those people who, the layman. Lowest common denominator as well, I would probably say.
I love the story about Sword for a number of reasons. Obviously, like I spoke about in one of my social media posts about, when I was a young guy, I grew up, on Memorial Day or whatever. My father and I would sit down, and Longest Day was always on the viewing menu. And obviously, Peter Lawford. My parents were big Rat Pack folks, so Peter Lawford was a known quantity in the house. And then he obviously stands out, and Lovett's legend stands out, furthered along by Longest Day. But Stephen, you and I and Woody had jumped in, and quite a few other folks, about in talking about Lovett and some of his decisions. And we were, before we went on air, we were both kind of picking up our copies and talking about him quite a little bit, just for a bit. And then obviously I told Stephen I nerded out. I grabbed out my map and I started looking at everything based on our conversations. And he's definitely, I wouldn't say he's not enigmatic. He is very much a larger than life character, as attested by a number of the folks who served underneath him. But I mean, we were talking about some of the decisions he made under fire. And maybe Stephen, you could talk to that a little bit. We'll roll back to talk about some of the other folks, but I wanted to get Lovett out and on its way and out of the way, so we could talk about some other stuff. But I mean, obviously, being a kind of a central figure to the Sword Beach story, whether we like it or not,
well, that's it. Yeah,
it needs to be addressed.
Lovett's story has kind of come to dominate the story of Sword Beach, and that's partially because of The Longest Day. Because pretty much the coverage of Sword Beach in The Longest Day is Lovett and Millen, his piper, and they come ashore, and there's some desultory fire, and there's some shell fire, and a bit of background machine gun fire, and Sean Connery gets a dunking. But then they get up on the beach and they're toasted by a French civilian, the mayor of Colleville, who appears with some champagne, and everything's all very jolly. And then they march to Pegasus Bridge, and that's kind of become one of the defining stories of Sword Beach, which is that the British land, and then Lovett and his piper leads the the relief of Pegasus Bridge, which of course it wasn't really the relief at all. They crossed the bridge and then advanced well beyond it. But and so yeah, he's become part of the Sword Beach story. Even though, and I'm going to get stick for this, I know I am, but he didn't have a huge amount to do with what happens on Sword Beach. Not
No,
really.
no. I mean, they're actually in what, the second wave
Yeah,
coming
so
in,
the
correct?
reason, and yeah, the longest day is accurate in that they didn't face a huge amount of fire when they came onto the beach, but that's because they landed more than 90 minutes after the assault waves had come ashore. So they're much later. They're assault group 9 of 10 in the assault formation. So they're coming very much at the tail end, which isn't to say it wasn't dangerous. You know, there were still snipers, there was still
Yep.
mortar fire and shell fire dropping on the beach, but the reason people perceive Sword Beach as a bit of an easy landing is because they showed that wave landing in the longest day, and it
Right.
wasn't like that for the assault waves. But
That's really
Wow. Yeah.
interesting.
The South Lancs, the Second East Yorks, and the
yeah,
13th, 18th, they all come in, and
yeah,
and again, a lot of my because, like you said, like we talked about, the historiography of Sword is so barren. A lot of it is visual for me. Like a lot of those first photographs, like the first time, because so many DD tanks, so few DD tanks landed in the American sectors.
mm,
The real You get the majority of the photographic evidence of their utility comes off of Sword.
yeah,
Um, Seeing the
yeah.
advances, and you can see the skirts at the tanks. And you had posted a picture of one recently. I think it was it four commando was trailing behind.
Oh yeah, and their advance into Weestrom, yes.
Yeah, what a wonderful shot that is. And again,
Really
these
dramatic
the
shot, yeah.
DDs are kind of like unicorns in terms of the evidence levels and their utility, because of their employment, or the disastrous employment, say at Omaha.
Mm,
But to see them in action and actually doing the job they were meant to do, employed correctly, and then coupled that with like the crabs and the AVREs, you really see all of Hobart's funnies really um, at their culmination point in terms of utility, and you see it at Sword.
yeah.
Um,
And you don't see it at the other beaches. Like you say, at Omaha, for half of them, it went very wrong. They were launched too far out and most of them sunk. The other half were taken directly into the beach. So they didn't get a chance to perform as had been intended. And that's largely the case at Gold and Juno and Utah as well. That the landing craft took them in much, much closer because of the conditions. But at Swords, they launch 5,000 yards out. And so they have this chance to show how they were meant to work. It's the one beach where they're successfully employed as they were intended to be.
Now the
So yeah,
water conditions, they launched. So Sword was what, about almost an hour and 15 or hour and 20 after the American sectors launched. Is that
that's
about
an
right?
hour. It's
About an
so
hour.
H hour on Omaha and Utah was 6:30, and on Sword it was 7:25. So
So the sea state was a little bit more friendly, or just about
yeah,
the same.
it seems to have been a little bit more friendly than it was to the west. And part of the reason they went in closer was because there wasn't much enemy reaction, and because they could see that the sea state was even better if they got a little bit closer in, and it would give the DDs the chance to move a bit faster. Even so, it was still a bit rough. They were fighting a current, a westerly current that was pushing them
Yep.
east, and it slowed down their speed considerably. They were hoping to make 4 knots, and they could barely make 3
Yeah.
on the approach. So they were a bit behind schedule, but they still managed to get onto the beach with the assault wave.
See, and just that little piece of detail there, um, people tend to think about many topics, but very binary, very linearly. But in this case, knowing the sea state and its impact on the DD frame, and how the mechanisms actually work, um, tells you a lot about their employment, how they were able to make their way to the beach, but the difficulties they were fighting. We always read about Omaha. Oh, they launched off and they were swamped, and boom,
Mm,
the guys are popping their life rafts, but you never really get that detailed look at how they're employed. But again, just amazing to see them actually in action, doing what they were supposed to be doing. There's plenty of photographic evidence of them supporting the street fighting. Um, and again, the French, one of the French troops going head to head with the German position behind one of the strong points, and literally the French commandos are like, we need tank support, and they start running back to get it. Um, Again, I highly encourage all of our listeners, when Stephen's book hits the streets, you'll definitely not be disappointed reading those details. If you're a nerd like I am about World War II and Leighton, you will enjoy reading about these men at the bayonet point,
You will
really doing the
probably
hard
like the
fighting.
fact then that as well as seeing the DD tanks in town and employed in the battlefield, there's also some pictures in the book of them landing at H hour, because I managed to find
Oh,
images
fantastic.
from H hour, which are pretty rare. You know, there's not many across any of the beaches, but yeah, there's some nice shots of them coming ashore, which is they're a bit grainy, you know, given the conditions that
Yeah.
the photographs were taken under. But yeah, it was fascinating to find these pictures, which were all actually sent to me. Several people have been so helpful in compiling this book. Friends and people on social media and members of the We Have Ways team have all been very helpful and sent me stuff if they come across things. And so I was lucky that people highlighted these images to me. So it's been great.
Brilliant.
It's amazing how, I'm sorry, Leighton, how
No,
the
no,
communities come together to help with these different folks' projects. I mean, it's been a great community of interest and everybody helping each other.
hmm.
Sorry, Leighton, go
No,
ahead,
no, I was
pal.
gonna the We Have Ways community is outstanding. I'm an IC member myself, and and I see on social media, I'm in two platoon WhatsApp chats, as they call themselves, or we call it, um, and they're extremely helpful in terms of research and direction and signposting to certain things. I mean, I don't see so much on Twitter. I did before, but obviously I've come away from it. But yeah, it's brilliant. That's the power, the good thing of social media, isn't it, really? And
Yeah.
then swinging back to We Have Ways, will you be there this year?
Yes, I will.
Brilliant. I look
I think
forward to getting a
I'm going
copy
to
in
be on the
person.
Friday afternoon, and yeah, I'll be talking about the book. And in fact, I'll be talking about the sample chapter I sent you, the Battle of Weestrum, and how I came to
Brilliant.
assemble that story. And we'll cycle around to that in this, but yeah, there'll be a full audio visual experience when I talk
All
about it.
right,
Brilliant.
Leighton, you're
I
going to be
was,
on assignment. I'm going to be having you get a copy for me and get
I,
Stephen to sign it.
yeah, I was going to pre-order online from somewhere, but I thought, I'll get her in person instead.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's swing back to Love It. Let's get that out of the way.
So
Again,
yeah,
that huge personality, and he, like you said, he dominates a lot of the popular culture narrative of what happened on Sword. But really, he's kind of a small piece to it.
he's
Um,
a very small piece, really, and you know, aside from the fact that obviously contrary to what the longest day would make you think, that there was more than just the commandos landing. He isn't even leading the commandos. It's six commando under Mills Roberts who are leading the advance. And really, they're the ones that have been overlooked the most, I would say, from all of the commando units, because they lose out to Lovett and Millen. So when I came to write that chapter, it was really a case of following six commando and their advance. And that's when, something that was completely new to me, I hadn't realized. We've all seen Lovett's advance mapped, usually going through Colville and then down into San Albin and then over to Pegasus Bridge. And I'm very lucky that Six Commando's War Diary is amazingly detailed with two reports from the troops, the units within the commando that led the advance. First, it was two troop, and then three troop took over, and they provide grid references for pretty much
Wow.
everything that happened. Man shot by sniper, and a six-figure grid reference. Overcame unclear position trenches, another six-figure grid reference, and it's like, wow, this is perfect. And I
Mm.
plotted that out, and then I found because their operational order isn't included, unfortunately. That's not in the war diary. But what I then found was their briefing model. So the actual 3D map, if you like, the sand table that they were using to plan their route. And their route is all marked out on this. And it's actually in film footage in the Imperial War Museum archive of them practicing and looking at the model. And the cameraman has basically just shot them as they're all gathered around looking at the route they're going to take. And this route is mapped out on this lovely little three-dimensional map. And it is exactly the route that the grid references in the reports also give. and it is different to the one that we usually see of marching through Colville and then down the road to St Aubin. And that route has always been backed up by some of the photographs that were taken by Captain Evans of the Army Film and Photographic Unit, advancing past Colville Church, which gives this idea that all the commandos took that route. But Captain Evans was with Lovett and his headquarters section. He wasn't with 6th Commando. So 6th Commando take this specific route as planned through the woods to the east of Colville and down to St Aubin. And once you know that route, once you've got that mapped out, then you read the reports, and then you read Mills Roberts' memoir and some of the other memoirs from 6th Commando. Suddenly you can piece together and see where the individual events that they recount are actually occurring. And it suddenly all comes together. You can make sense of what they're saying as they suddenly, then we turned off the road into some tracks where there's thick undergrowth, and you look at the map, you say, oh, that's that wood. That makes perfect sense now. And suddenly you can turn that whole thing. You can pick out individual accounts and individual little observations that are made in these memoirs and place them very specifically on the battlefield, if you like. And it's then that I realized that, yeah, Lovett wasn't following 6th Commando at all. And he goes off on his own route through Colville on the popularly mapped route, which, and I didn't really think about it at the time I was writing it. But then when I finished writing and I was reading the whole book back for the copy edits and that sort of thing, I just suddenly started thinking, why did he do this? And I think I've worked it out. At one point, 6th Commando are held up by a couple of bunkers, and this is just to the north of Colville. And Mills Roberts recounts how Lovett came on the radio demanding to know what the holdup was. And at the time that he was making that radio call, he was probably at the north end of Colville. And then suddenly he goes south through Colville and stops following 6th Commando altogether. And I suspect, although he doesn't say it in his memoir, I mean, his memoir is fairly vague.
Yeah, it's bare bones.
Yeah. And I suspect he was impatient and just decided, we're going to go this way.
Yeah, I think there's probably the guidance to get to Pegasus as quickly as possible and relieve the Oxenbucks, and it was probably weighing on him heavily. I mean, we talked about this a bit on in the Twitter thread. Sometimes that expediency overrules tactical prudence in this case. And like the three of us, you, me, and Woody, basically said it doesn't make sense to go headlonging through the middle of a small town, which could be a sniper and ambush fest, unless you think the Germans are not there in force and your other forces hung up. And this will allow you to bypass the holdup. It just,
I mean, it would make sense if it was in a sort of different environment or a different setup. But by doing what he did, by assigning 6th Commando to carve the way through and create a route for them that they would then follow. Yeah, you could make short diversions if you want, but what he essentially did was go off on a completely different route, into enemy territory with his flanks totally exposed on both sides, and ignore the benefit of 6th Commando. And it didn't gain him much, because he gets into Saint Aubin from the west end just as 6th Commando arriving at the east
clearing
end.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, and he had not done any prior reconnaissance of Colville, so he didn't have any clue what the German strength was in the town. I mean, he could have been running headlong into a German force that had garrisoned the town.
Yeah.
And then what's he going to do?
Suffolks
He's going to
were there, and
withdraw.
they were about to push through the town, but from what I can work out, it seems like he was going through the town before the Suffolks did. So, yeah, it was a bit of a risk and somewhat unnecessary. It didn't really save him much time.
Yeah.
And they were lucky, I would say.
I mean, if he follows 6th in and they get held up, I mean, the ground in that area is not terribly built up. I mean, you could bypass as they occupied the German forces, worked the flanks, and then moved out around and still gotten to where he needed to be in roughly the same amount of time. No,
yeah.
So again, the thing is, though, it's easy to sit in Monday morning quarterback a battlefield commander as he's making a decision on the fly. I personally would not have gone into the town. It's just me. It's fraught with danger in terms of how you could easily be held up.
he doesn't really have a fighting unit either. He's got Brigade HQ, so he's got a small number of fighting troops, but it's mainly signalers,
I was
medics,
going to say it's
admin staff,
signalers, your
staff.
operations men.
Yeah,
Not your commandos units that are used to fire and maneuver um, and overwhelming a target or objective.
yeah.
So
And I'm
yeah,
sure they're well trained, but they don't have all of the kit and all the formations that would make it easy to deploy in the event of them hitting a big enemy. But yeah, like you say, it's very easy for us to sort of sit and consider this now and judge. But yeah, it's not. It's very easy to, but it doesn't mean it's right.
mm,
And actually,
but
that's something that I avoid in the book. I haven't made too many judgments on any of the actions that are in the book, unless there are, some wildly crazy actions. But in the
yeah.
main, I leave that for the reader to decide. I've concentrated very much on what happened, and I've made it as clear and plain as possible. The circumstances of all of the different events and people's actions in response to what is happening. But there's very little judgment in it, and to a certain extent, not as much analysis as people might expect. People know from my tweets and that sort of thing that I am very analytical in a lot of the stuff that I do. But in this sense and on this occasion, I haven't overanalyzed what was happening on Sword Beach too much. I think I've tried to present the information in a way that people can make up their own minds about everything rather than judging.
Well, there's definitely a value for objectivity in this, and like you said, to allow the reader the room and space to make their own decisions or make their own assessments about how the situation bared out. You're presenting the facts as you were able to piece them together, and there's definitely a value to that. So um,
Absolutely.
now, I think one of the questions that we did send over to you, I was like, one of the things I wanted to know was there anything in your research that surprised you, that caught you off guard, or made you look at a portion of the fight in a different view, in a different light, or made you reevaluate how you previously looked at a particular situation or a particular action?
I think all of it, because although I know quite a bit about D-Day and all of the individual beaches and the individual actions, the more I dug into each chapter, shall we say, or each instance that I detailed, the more I realized that I didn't know enough. And there's so much more to learn. And yeah, some of the aspects of what was happening on Sword Beach were, yeah, that you think and then you realize there's a whole lot more to know. And I
Yeah.
love it as one example, and eventually working out the route that he had taken as opposed to the route Six Commando had taken was a big surprise, because I'd always just assumed that they'd all gone the same way, and that had largely been through Colville, and that very quickly proved not to be the case. Um, I was surprised by the level of detail actually that is presented in people's memoirs, and um, how much more information I could glean from memoirs that just isn't in the official reports. That said, I was meticulously cross-checking everything that I was using, and the official record, the war diaries and the reports that are filed in the weeks or months after D-Day were absolutely crucial for that and for understanding the context of people's memoirs. But there was so much more detail that could be added by people's reminiscences. As long as I could be certain that it was accurate, there was so much more to glean from those. The other thing I think that I used a lot more than many people have in the past, I would say, is aerial photographs. And I was amazed by the quality of some of the aerial pictures that I was coming across, to the extent that I could see individual troops on the ground in many instances. I could work out routes of advance based on the presence of little dots in the streets, the figures of people, which usually, again, I was cross-checking with the records and working stuff out. I was looking at maps to see what the most likely route of advance was, and if there was corroboration in the aerial photographs of that, if there's people on those streets, then that was always useful. And the war diaries, again, would quite often specify the routes that units had taken. So, I mean, looking at somewhere like Lyon-sur-Mer, for instance, and 41 Royal Marine Commandos advance into the town, there's quite a lot of useful aerial imagery there to pinpoint where individual units were moving to, and that sort of thing. I think Lyon-sur-Mer is another good example of a place that surprised me, because we hear about 41 Royal Marine Commando heading west, their objective to link up with Juno Beach, and 48 Commando who had landed there. And that's pretty much all you ever hear. But actually, Lyon-sur-Mer was a really significant battle, a very big battle, and the very first German counterattack came at Lyon-sur-Mer, rather than 21 Panzer Division's counterattack from Caen much later in the day. And the Germans actually held the British back at Lyon-sur-Mer for the entire day. And that's not something that you usually come across. And I knew this very loosely, but when you actually look into the action that was fought there, the Germans performed very, very well in blunting a commando's advance and blunting the attack of 3 of the Churchill AVREs, of the Royal Engineers, that attempted to attack the strong point there. Wiedelstrander Nest 21, codenamed Trout, held out all day and into the next day, and wasn't silenced until June the 8th, I think. So that came as quite a surprise. The more I unpicked what had actually happened there, it wasn't just a case of the commandos weren't able to advance. This was actually a very good bit of defense by the Germans, reinforced by a counterattack coming out of the village immediately to the south, and holding up the entire British advance, to the extent that the commandos have to withdraw to within, I think it's half a mile of the western end of the landing area. That's how close the Germans were to the landing beaches, even on the end of D-Day, which is, a very significant thing when you think about it.
If they're able to penetrate up that far, especially that far west, they could split between the beaches, and because you probably, as most folks who are military historians know, I mean, one of the weakest points in any allied front or unit front is the seam between 2 units. In this case, the seam between the 2 beaches. You could easily penetrate up, because most units tend to not cover the flanks when you're tied in as strenuously as you would your broad frontage. In this case, the Germans penetrate in between those. Then they can start splitting and working and what we call rolling up the flanks in strength. But I mean, like you said, these are things you get from that intimate research. And I don't know if the Imperial War Museum archives are as somewhat chaotic as the National Archives are over here in terms of dealing with and finding things. I know for personal experience, things misfiled, misplaced, very tough to deal with. Sometimes you find things in the weirdest places. But your ability to take the war diary entries and then marry them up with those very localized, very tactical actions makes for very, very compelling reading. And I think a lot of folks are going to get a lot out of this. And again, it's going to fill that huge gap that exists in the history, the D-Day history. And I know that's a kind of lofty, and you got broad shoulders. You're going to have to bear that one out, pal. But and I got to tell you, and I'm excited if you're going to, with the same vigor and the same attention to detail and the same talent for telling the story, if you're going to apply that to each of the beaches in their own right, I will definitely be buying copies of everything.
I have to get the whole 5-volume series ultimately.
Better start, chop on. Let's go. Come on, get the work done. You got one out. You know what happens when you release one book. You got to start working on the second one.
Yeah.
No rest for the weary.
I've had brief period to rest and recover, so I'll have to crack on with the next one. But no, I'm glad you like the approach I've used, and it's very much driven by the personal narratives, the memoirs and the oral archives, and the people who have left their fairly comprehensive reminiscences on what happened. And they're really useful because they provide us with emotions and personal experiences and how they felt, and their own visual experience of what had happened. And then to make sure that that was all being put in the proper context and was true, because a lot of these, especially the oral archives, are being recorded 50 years after the event, so a lot of stuff has been misremembered. Combining that with the war diaries and the reports filed at the time to make sure that everything was in its proper context was important, to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. And it meant a lot of unpicking of people's memoirs. There's the commander of the support troop in 41 Royal Marine Commando, Douglas Grant, I think it was. Grant is his surname anyway. He was support troop commander, and he's left a very visceral memoir of his fighting in Lyon-sur-Mer. The Fuel of the Fire, I think it's called, off the top of my head. And it's very, very good because it's so visceral. It's his experience of it. But he obviously wrote it without reference to any of the official record, because he mistimes events quite significantly. He places one particular bombing raid which knocked out the headquarters of 41 Royal Marine Commando. It actually happened on the 7th of June. He places it on the 6th of June, or the other way around, I can't remember. So it was important to make sure that I got those details, but I put them in the correct context when it came to writing the book, and actually put it in the correct time. He describes what happened when the bombs fell on the HQ in very graphic detail, but he puts it on the wrong day. Which is understandable. This
Absolutely.
is time after the event, and I kind of feel that there's no criticism on my part, there's no judgment. It's just my job to recontextualize that appropriately, and using those people who were actually there to guide the narrative, and then just use the official record and the aerial photographs and the film footage that was shot to make sure that it's all in the proper context and being chronologically presented in the right order was very much the aim of the book. And that way you get a good retelling of what happened in dramatic fashion. And I unashamedly wrote it in a very dramatic fashion, because it's D-Day. This is one of the seminal events of the 20th century. It was a dramatic event. And like you were saying earlier, Joe, that there's so many books out there written by generals that refer to lines on a map and units that exist in name only, taking a town in a sentence and overlooking the actual events of that capture of a town and everything that goes behind a day's fighting. And I didn't want a book like that. I wanted a book that really dramatically told the events of a very dramatic occasion.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't want to play down the events, do you? Because it's like, oh, is that what happened? It doesn't sound very exciting or very dramatic. Kind of been that ferocious fighting, but you have to not jazz her up, but write as you know it, really.
Write it as it was being experienced.
As it was.
And it's not easy sometimes. It was quite difficult, and in fact in my my guidance notes at the start, there's a list of things like distances and comparison of different units and how I've presented some of the information, like names of formations and that sort of thing. My final bit of guidance is throughout the day it was, I couldn't endlessly repeat it was very noisy and there were lots of shell fire and machine gun fire ricocheting across the place the entire time. So I kind of put that in the guidance. Bear in mind that pretty much all of the events that are being recounted, it's happening under fire. There is a continual cacophony of noise and flashes and rumblings in the distance, and to try and keep that in the back of your mind as you read it. Even so, I still wrote that out a lot during
the I don't think most people understand that the longer you're exposed to that kind of those kind of conditions, the more you build up a kind of a mental almost an immunity to it, where it's just another noise in the background, like a car horn. It's just something that happens in the background. So a lot of times when you read these personal accounts, it lacks a little of that, because these men have obviously been exposed to it for so long, it becomes like a second nature thing. But the drama that increases the level of drama, and they don't realize it. And frankly, there's really no need to increase the level of drama in anything related to D-Day in terms of the major operations, because the drama is already inherent. But again, like I could feel my pulse pick up reading as I think it was at Fort Troop was advancing down the roadway and the machine gun, the mortars started firing. As soon as I read the word stonk, in my mind, my American brain, I'm remembering what it's like to be mortared, and my pulse rate picks up. And I hope the folks that read the book will get that, and I think they will, just from the nature of your writing. The snap of rounds above the head, or the smattering of rounds hitting a wall or the ground nearby. I don't. I know combat veterans understand what that's like and feels like, but I know that folks that start reading your book are going to get that again. I hate to keep throwing that word out there, that immediacy, the intimacy of those fights, and that to me is the critical component here, because that's what we relate to, and we always
Yeah.
bring this back and we talk about it, right, Leighton? Almost every
Mhm.
show we talk about our ability to relate to somebody that we know in our own lives that may have experienced some of these things. It gives you a kind of the gateway or the viewway into what they may have experienced. And I think
Absolutely.
the folks that read this are going to get that, even if they have no personal connection to anyone that
Yeah.
was fighting on sword.
And more so than those generals writing that strategic overview books, you're not going to feel connected with that. You could, oh, I know somebody who fought in that battle. Amazing. Look what they did. But if you're actually reading it through their eyes, it's different. Oh, wow, we went through that. That sounds incredible, intense, yada, 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 and yeah, rather than that general strategic overview, because it's a board game to them then. There's no emotional connection where, say, with the old beat, for example, I think that's how you know, a lot of Marines were able to relate to it because that was the grunt's eye view. If it was just, yeah, it hits differently.
Mm.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think you it makes it more relatable. It makes it much more understandable for the, again, even the layman reader to
Yeah.
understand how these actions took place and who the men were that were undertaking them. And
Yeah.
um
And if they
it,
if their grandkids, the children, the grandkids are reading it, they can say, "Oh my God, my grandfather went through this. That's insane. We have to go and see this place."
Mm.
and I think that's become a characterization of a lot of the more modern histories of World War II that have been written, yours included. It's become much more personal. It's been less of the strategic view, um, the church the Churchillian, the Patton-esque, the Montgomery-esque views of how the war took place. Instead, because I know a lot of people from that age range, that period in time, very glamorized view of how the war took place without the view of the mud and the blood and all the things that the frontline infantryman or commando experienced. Again, I feel like your book is going to bridge a huge gap in the historiography of World War II for that particular battle, and inward. Like, I can't wait to read the Hillman portions of your book. I mean, to me, like, um, Peter Caddick Adams he did a great job working through his on Sand and Steel. Absolutely love it. PCA is the bomb. I cannot wait for the deep dive in Hillman and all the other small unit actions in the area behind the beach, which to me set up the larger fight for Normandy, for the UK and the Commonwealth forces. So can't
Yeah,
wait, pal. I mean, when are we looking at? When's the release? Do we have an official date, and where can we find it?
officially, the book comes out on the 23rd of May. I don't know, it might appear in shops a couple of days before that. That sometimes happens. So there's an ebook, hardback book, and the audio book, and yeah, they'll definitely be available by the 23rd.
We're looking at
Brilliant.
Amazon. We any
Uh,
particular?
there's well, there's several places that are stocking it. I mean, you can go online and find it on Waterstones and WH Smith's and various bookshops. If you Google Sword Beach Stephen Fisher, I think the first hit that comes up is the Penguin page for it, and there's lots of links on there for it.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll be traveling around quite a bit. I'll be at
That was
Chalk
my next
Valley.
question.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'll be at Chalk Valley and We Have Ways Festival. I'm giving some talks in London and Portsmouth and Gosport, and I hope to hit a few more places over the summer. I'll be in Normandy as well, obviously, but I'll be quite busy then.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, it will be in most of the bookshops physically. I hope. I mean, it's a big publisher. It's Penguin, which is very
Yeah,
exciting.
I
So
was gonna say. I mean, I
I look forward to
self-published one of
seeing it.
my book, and I it must be nice to have like this massive publishing house, you know, just galvanizing its forces behind you and doing that kind of
Oh,
thing.
it's been tremendous. I mean, I submitted the manuscript quite late, and at the very end of 2023, in fact, at 7:30 p.m. on the 31st of December, and that was late. But the publishers and Penguin, the entire team there have been absolutely fantastic and coming together and pulling everything together so quickly. I was astounded and totally overwhelmed by their enthusiasm for it as well. And they seem to really like it, which is great. But you know, when it comes down to the nitty gritty, the copy editing and then the typesetting and the production of the maps and the reproduction of the images, they have all worked so hard on it. I've been getting emails late in the evening on the weekends from members of the team to get it all together and ready to schedule. They have been absolutely fantastic. So
Brilliant.
yeah, it's been wonderful having such a team work on it behind me as well. It's been incredible. I'm so grateful to all of them.
That's fantastic. Now, I have to ask, and it's not a point of pride or anything. Are we the first pod or publicity hit you've done in advance of the publication? If we're not, it's okay. I'm not
No,
going to
you
take it.
are. You
Oh
actually
wow.
are.
Wonderful.
I literally got back from South Africa last week. I was on a ship with very ropey internet connection. Um, and yeah, and before that, I was only back in the country for less than, well, I think it was 10 days after I got back from Antarctica, where I
Oh
was
wow.
most of February and March. So yeah,
Real tripping.
I've been out of the loop for a while, and I suddenly get back, and the book exists in real form. And I suddenly think, oh crikey, I need to start talking about this, don't I? And do
Brilliant.
more than just tweet pictures and brief excerpts from the text.
Love the
Um,
picture of you sitting on the couch staring at the box on the coffee table. That was
yes.
beautiful. I pretty much did the same thing. When my book came out, I just didn't take any pictures of it. I just took
Yeah.
the book out and I looked at my wife and I said, "Isn't it odd to see my name on the cover of a book?"
Yes.
Because it's a culmination point, right? There's so much work
Yeah.
that goes on in all the research and to hold the final product in your hand.
It's
It's just
absolutely incredible to hold it. It's
That's a
thicker
gorgeous
than I
book.
imagined, and it's I mean I'll ooze over this. It's very tactile. This is all raised font, and the
Lovely.
red bits this super glossy and shiny. You know, it's
whoever
very
worked on the
very
graphics for the
nice.
cover. Outstanding work too, by the
Mm.
way.
They did a brilliant job on that. Yeah, and I mean they first sent me a proof over a year ago now. I think, or well, nearly a year ago. And when I first saw that, I was nowhere near finished writing the thing, and they sent me a cover, and I was very excited by that. I was delighted as well because I suggested the image as one that's kind of um, quite a famous Sword Beach image. This is supposedly Lovett striding into the water.
Yeah,
You know, a slightly different view of the image rather than having Millen in the foreground. There's
Millen. Yeah,
focus on the troops actually wading ashore. It's very descriptive of what's happening on Sword Beach. And yeah, it's just carried on evolving like that, and it's been great. And yeah, to see it now, having only seen it digitally for so long on a screen, to now actually hold it and yeah, it's just mind blowing.
well, congratulations. It's fantastic to see it in
Yeah.
print, and I can't wait to get my hands on
Yeah.
it. For all of our listeners, don't forget we're on Patreon. You can catch us on YouTube, Buzzsprout, and Spotify. You can pick up a copy of Sword Beach in late May at Penguin and probably in numerous other outlets, and hopefully Amazon too, for those of us on this side of the pond. Also, if you want to catch up with Stephen an in-person appearance, Chalk Valley, and also we have Ways Fest. He'll be appearing there. Um, I will be very jealous of whoever goes, and please somebody record it for me so I can see it. And thanks again, Stephen, for
Yeah.
coming by. And again, we're glad we're first. It's good to be
Oh
first at
yeah,
something.
yeah, you're definitely first. I will be doing a video stream with Woody on World War II TV in June at some
Brilliant.
point, so there'll be there'll be another opportunity for people across the pond to see me that way, and there'll be visuals for that as well. So I'll talk about, I'll show some of these aerial photographs that we've been talking about. I think Woody and I haven't decided fully yet, but I'll probably talk about Six Commandos Advance and how I pieced that together. So there'll be lots of imagery, maps, dots on maps, that sort of thing to look at.
Where can everybody find you on Twitter?
At Sea Spitfires.
Yeah, and you won't be disappointed if you give Stephen a follow. Again, as we alluded to during the discussion, a lot of the aerial imagery and then the overlapping modern Google imagery, so you can take a look at the grounds look like now versus then, and then the ability to take those war diary entries. And I, for one, was knocked out when you started pointing out, oh, this is a DD tank, and I'm going, I can see the skirt on that thing. Like you said, very detailed aerial imagery. So give him a follow. You won't be disappointed, and you definitely won't be disappointed if you pick up a copy of Sword Beach. Stephen, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to see you in We Have Ways Fest and get a copy signed. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, come and find me. I
think
you're
gonna get 2 copies signed.
I will do. Absolutely, I will do.
All right, pal. Take care of yourself. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheerio. Thank you.